I was the perfect child star, smiling on cue, dancing on beat. But behind the scenes, I was breaking. This is not a story about fame. It is a story about survival, about healing, about becoming whole, despite literally everything. And in the next sections, we will walk through that journey, one chapter at a time. Let's start. Section 1. The Mask of Stardom. Alyson Stoner was everywhere. TV shows, movies, music videos, red carpets, award shows, smiling, dancing, performing. They were the face of childhood joy. The Disney kid, the funny sidekick, the talented dancer, the one who always looked happy. But that was the mask. That was the role. That was the image. Behind the scenes, things were different, very different. Fame started early, too early. Alyson was just a child, still learning who they were, still growing, still fragile. But the world didn't wait. The cameras didn't pause. The contracts didn't care. They were pushed into the spotlight, told to smile, told to perform, told to be perfect. Every move was watched. Every word was judged. Every mistake was punished. There was no room to breathe, no space to feel, no time to rest. Alyson became a product, a brand, a character, not a person, not a child, not a soul. They learned to hide their feelings, to push down pain, to stay quiet, to stay small, because the industry rewards silence. It rewards obedience. It rewards the mask. The mask became normal. It became automatic. It became permanent. Even off camera, Alyson felt the pressure. To be likable, to be safe, to be easy to work with. They were praised for being mature, for being professional, for being low maintenance. But inside, they were hurting. They were confused. They were lost. They didn't know who they were, only who they were supposed to be. The mask was heavy. It was tight. It was suffocating. And no one asked what was underneath. No one asked how they felt. No one asked what they needed. Because child stars are not seen as children. They are seen as workers, as tools, as entertainment. Alyson was praised for their talent, but ignored for their humanity. They were booked for roles, but not cared for as a person. They were surrounded by adults, but not protected by them. They were given scripts, but not given safety. This is the dark side of stardom. The part no one talks about. The part hidden behind the smile. Alyson learned to survive, to adapt, to perform. They became what others wanted. They became what the industry demanded. They became what the audience expected. But they lost themselves, piece by piece, moment by moment. The mask was not just for the screen. It followed them home. It followed them to school. It followed them into their dreams. They forgot how to cry. They forgot how to rest. They forgot how to be real. Because being real was risky. Being real was messy. Being real was not allowed. They were told to be grateful, to be lucky, to be quiet. But gratitude cannot replace safety. Luck cannot replace love. Silence cannot replace truth. Alyson began to feel the cracks. The pressure built. The mask slipped. They started to question, to wonder, to feel. Who am I? What do I want? Why am I hurting? These questions were scary. They were new. They were dangerous. Because the mask had no answers. Only rules. Only roles. Only silence. Alyson tried to keep up. To stay strong. To stay perfect. But the pain grew louder. The confusion grew deeper. The mask grew heavier. They were praised on screen, but punished in silence. They were loved by fans, but lost to themselves. This section is not about fame. It is about the cost of fame. The hidden cost. The emotional cost. The human cost. It is about the mask. The one so many wear. The one so few remove. Alyson's story begins here. With the mask. With the silence. With the pain. But it does not end here. Because the mask can be removed. The silence can be broken. The pain can be healed. This is the first step. The first crack. The first truth. The mask of stardom is powerful. But truth is stronger. And Alyson chose truth. Section 2. The toddler-to-train-wreck pipeline. Industry patterns that exploit young talent. How childhood fame leads to adult breakdown. Alyson's early signs of burnout and identity loss. The entertainment industry loves young stars. They are cute. They are energetic. They bring in ratings. They sell products. They make money. But behind the scenes, there is a darker pattern. A cycle. A pipeline. It starts with a toddler. A child with talent. A child with charm. A child who can perform. The child is signed. The child is trained. The child is marketed. They are given scripts. They are given costumes. They are given roles. But they are not given protection. They are not given space. They are not given time to grow. The industry moves fast. It does not wait. It does not care about childhood. It wants results. It wants profit. It wants control. Alyson Stoner entered this pipeline early. They were young. They were gifted. They were eager to please. They were praised for being professional, for being focused, for being mature. But they were still a child, still learning, still developing. The work hours were long. The expectations were high. The pressure was constant. There was no room for mistakes, no room for emotions, no room for being human. Alyson began to feel tired, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. They were losing touch with themselves, with their feelings, with their identity. They were becoming a product, a brand, a character, not a person, not a child, not Alyson. This is how the pipeline works. It takes a child. It shapes them. It sells them. Then it discards them. When they grow up, when they change, when they break. Many child stars follow this path. They rise fast. They shine bright. Then they fall hard. Some turn to drugs. Some face mental illness. Some disappear from the spotlight. The public calls it a breakdown, a meltdown, a tragedy. But it is not random. It is not sudden. It is not their fault. It is the result of years of pressure, years of control, years of silence. Alyson saw the signs early. They felt the burnout. They felt the confusion. They felt the loss. They did not know who they were, only who they were supposed to be. They were praised for being easy to work with, for not complaining, for staying quiet. But inside, they were screaming. They were hurting. They were fading. They tried to keep up, to stay strong, to stay perfect. But the cracks were growing. The mask was slipping. The pain was rising. They began to question everything. Why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? What do I want? These questions were dangerous, because the industry does not like questions. It likes obedience. It likes silence. Alyson started to feel alone. Even in a crowd, even on set, even with fans. They were surrounded by people, but not truly seen, not truly heard, not truly understood. They were expected to perform, to entertain, to smile, even when they were exhausted, even when they were sad, even when they were lost. This is the cost of childhood fame. It steals time. It steals identity. It steals safety. It replaces play with work. It replaces growth with pressure. It replaces joy with fear. Alyson's story is not unique. It is part of a pattern, a system, a machine. The machine does not care about feelings. It cares about ratings, cares about profit, cares about control. But Alyson began to resist, to reflect, to feel. They started therapy. They started journaling. They started asking hard questions. They wanted to heal. They wanted to grow. They wanted to be real. This was the beginning of change. Not easy, not quick, not perfect, but real, honest, necessary. Alyson's early signs of burnout were warnings, not just for them, but for all of us. For parents, for producers, for fans. We must ask better questions. We must protect young talent. We must listen. Because childhood is sacred. It is not a product. It is not a brand. It is not a role. It is a time to grow, to explore, to feel. Alyson's journey shows us the cost, but also the possibility, the hope, the healing. They are not a train wreck. They are a survivor, a truth teller, a guide. This section is not just about Alyson. It is about every child star, every young performer, every lost identity. It is about the pipeline, the one we must break, the one we must rebuild, the one we must rethink. Alyson's story continues. With courage, with clarity, with care. They are finding their voice, their truth, their self, and they are sharing it, so others can heal, so others can grow, so others can be free. Section 3. Behind Closed Doors. Family trauma, emotional neglect, and instability. How home life mirrored the chaos of fame. The silence around abuse and survival. Fame does not protect you. It does not shield you. It does not heal you. It hides things. It distracts people. Creates illusions. Alyson Stoner was famous. But fame did not make their home safe. It did not make their family stable. It did not make their childhood easy. Behind the cameras, behind the red carpets, behind the perfect smile, there was pain, there was chaos, there was fear, there was silence. Alyson's home life was unstable. There were fights, there were secrets, there were wounds. Some wounds were loud, some were quiet, some were never spoken. They lived in a house filled with tension, with confusion, with emotional neglect. There were moments of love, but they were mixed with control, mixed with fear, mixed with shame. Alyson did not feel safe. Not at home, not at work, not anywhere. They were praised in public, but punished in private. They were admired by fans, but ignored by family. They were told to be strong, to be grateful, to be quiet, but inside, they were hurting. They were scared. They were alone. The chaos at home matched the chaos of fame. Both were fast. Both were loud. Both were unstable. There was no place to rest. No place to cry. No place to be a child. Alyson learned to survive, to adapt, to stay small. They learned to read moods, to avoid conflict, to stay invisible. They became hyper-aware, hyper-responsible, hyper-controlled. These are signs of trauma, not personality, not maturity, not strength. They were coping. They were protecting themselves. They were trying to stay safe. But it came at a cost, a deep cost, a lasting cost. They lost trust. They lost connection. They lost parts of themselves. They began to dissociate, to disconnect from their body, to disconnect from their feelings, to disconnect from reality. This is what trauma does. It rewires the brain. It reshapes the body. It changes how you see the world. Alyson's story is not rare. Many children grow up in homes like this. Homes that look normal from the outside, but feel dangerous on the inside. Homes with rules, but no safety. Homes with love, but no consistency. Homes with parents, but no protection. Alyson did not speak about it for years. They kept it inside. They buried it deep. They wore the mask, because speaking up felt risky, It felt wrong. It felt unsafe. They were afraid of being blamed, afraid of being punished, afraid of being misunderstood. So they stayed silent. They smiled. They performed. They survived. But silence is heavy. It builds pressure. It creates distance. Alyson began to feel numb, disconnected, empty. They did not know how to ask for help. They did not know who to trust. They did not know what was normal. They thought the chaos was their fault. They thought the pain was deserved. They thought the silence was strength. This is how trauma hides. It hides in routines. It hides in success. It hides in silence. Alyson's fame made it harder, because people assumed they were fine. They were successful. They were talented. They were lucky. But luck does not erase trauma. Talent does not heal wounds. Success does not create safety. Alyson began to break. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly. They started to feel the weight, the confusion, the sadness. They started to notice the patterns, the fear, the control, the instability. They started to remember, to reflect, to feel. This was the beginning of healing. Not easy, not fast, not clean, but real, honest, necessary. They began therapy. They began journaling. They began speaking. They began naming the pain, naming the silence, naming the truth. It was hard. It was scary. It was exhausting. But it was also freeing, empowering, transforming. They learned that trauma is not weakness. It is not shameful. It is not permanent. It is something you can face, something you can heal, something you can grow from. Alyson's story is a mirror for anyone who grew up in chaos, for anyone who felt unsafe at home, for anyone who stayed silent to survive. It is a reminder that you are not alone, that your pain is real, that your healing is possible. Behind closed doors, many stories unfold, many wounds form, many truths hide. But those doors can open, the silence can break, the healing can begin. Alyson opened those doors. They walked through the pain. They faced the past. They chose truth. And now, they share it, so others can heal, so others can speak, so others can feel safe. This section is not just about trauma. It is about survival. It is about courage. It is about hope. Because behind every closed door, there is a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Section 4. Body, Control, and Collapse. The pressure to be perfect. The loss of autonomy. The breaking point. Alyson Stoner was praised for their body, for how it moved, for how it looked, for how it performed. But that praise came with pressure, with control, with expectations. They were told to be thin, to be toned, to be flawless. Every inch of their body was watched, judged, managed. They were weighed, measured, compared. Their body became a product, a tool, a brand. It was no longer theirs. It belonged to the industry, to the audience, to the machine. They were told what to eat, what not to eat, when to eat. They were told how to move, how to pose, how to smile. They were told how to shrink, how to disappear, how to be less visible, less emotional, less human. This is not health. This is not wellness. This is control. Alyson began to lose connection to their hunger, to their needs, to their body. They stopped listening to signals, stopped trusting sensations, stopped feeling safe. They developed disordered eating. They punished themselves. They restricted. They binged. They purged. They were trying to cope, trying to survive, trying to feel in control. But it was not control. It was fear. It was trauma. It was collapse. Their body began to break down. Fatigue, pain, confusion. Their mind began to spiral. Anxiety, depression, dissociation. They were not okay, but they kept performing, kept smiling, kept pretending, because stopping felt dangerous. Resting felt wrong. Asking for help felt impossible. They were praised for discipline, for perfection, for pushing through. But no one saw the cost. The exhaustion, the emptiness, the pain. They were collapsing. Quietly, slowly, completely. This is what happens when the body is controlled. When it is not respected, not heard, not loved. Alyson's story is not rare. Many performers face this. Many athletes. Many models. Many children. They are taught to ignore their bodies, to override signals, to chase perfection. They are taught that worth is external, that value is visual, that love is conditional. This creates harm, deep harm, lasting harm. Alyson began to realize this, to name it, to face it. They began to ask questions. Whose body is this? Whose rules am I following? What do I actually need? They began to listen, to slow down, to reconnect. They began therapy, somatic work, body-based healing. They learned to feel again, to breathe, to rest. They learned that hunger is not weakness, that fullness is not shame, that movement is not punishment. They learned that the body is wise. It remembers. It speaks. It deserves care. This was not easy. It was painful. It was messy. It was slow. But it was real. It was honest. It was healing. They began to reclaim their body, to choose food with kindness, to move with joy, to rest without guilt. They began to feel safe, to feel whole, to feel alive. This is what recovery looks like. Not perfect, not linear, but possible. Alyson's story is a reminder that control is not care, that discipline is not healing, that collapse is not failure. It is a signal, a message, a turning point. The body speaks, even when we don't listen, even when we silence it, even when we fear it. But it keeps speaking, through pain, through fatigue, through breakdown, until we hear it, until we honor it, until we heal. Alyson chose to heal, to listen, to trust. They chose to stop performing, to stop shrinking, to stop pretending. They chose to be real, to be messy, to be human. And in that choice, they found freedom. They found peace. They found themselves. This section is not just about the body. It is about autonomy, about dignity, about truth. It is about reclaiming what was taken, about honoring what was ignored, about loving what was once hated. Because the body is not a brand, not a product, not a performance. It is a home, a guide, a friend, and it deserves to be safe, to be nourished, to be free. Section 5. Religion and Repression. Growing up in purity culture. The conflict between faith and identity. How religious trauma shaped shame and silence. Alyson Stoner grew up in church. Not just any church. A strict one. A controlling one. A purity-focused one. They were taught rules. Lots of rules. About behavior. About clothing. About thoughts. They were told what was holy, what was sinful, what was allowed, what was forbidden. Sex was shameful. Desire was dangerous. Bodies were temptations. They learned to fear themselves, to fear others, to fear God. They were told to be pure, to be obedient, to be silent. They were told to submit, to suppress, to sacrifice. This was called faith. But it felt like control, felt like fear, felt like repression. Alyson tried to follow the rules. They wanted to be good, to be loved, to be accepted. They memorized verses. They prayed daily. They confessed constantly. But inside, They were confused. They were scared. They were hurting. They had questions. Big ones. About identity. About attraction. About truth. But questions were dangerous. They were seen as rebellion. As weakness. As sin. So Alyson stayed quiet. They buried their thoughts. They hid their feelings. They denied their truth. They felt shame. Deep shame. Heavy shame. Not because they did wrong, but because they existed. Because they felt. Because they were different. This is religious trauma. It's not just about beliefs. It's about fear. It's about control. It's about silence. Alyson was taught that identity must match doctrine. That desire must be erased. That questions must be punished. They were told that God would reject them. That family would disown them. That hell was waiting. So they tried to change. To fix themselves. To pray it away. They begged God to make them normal. To make them straight. To make them pure. They cried alone. They hated themselves. They felt broken. This is not faith. This is not love. This is not healing. It's trauma. It's repression. It's spiritual abuse. Alyson's story is not rare. Many people grow up like this. In churches that shame. In families that silence. In cultures that control. They learn to disconnect. From their body. From their truth. From their voice. They learn to perform. To pretend. To survive. But survival is not peace. It's not freedom. It's not joy. Alyson began to question. Slowly. Quietly. Bravely. They asked, what if God is not angry? What if love is not conditional? What if truth is not sin? They began to read. To reflect. To unlearn. They found new voices. New communities. New language. They learned about religious trauma. About purity culture. About spiritual healing. They learned that shame is not holy. That silence is not sacred. That repression is not righteousness. They began to reclaim their faith. Not the fear-based version. Not the controlling version. But a personal one. A faith rooted in love. In compassion. In truth. They began to accept themselves. To honor their identity. To speak their truth. It was hard. It was scary. It was painful. But it was also freeing. Empowering. Healing. They faced rejection. From some people. From some places. From some beliefs. But they also found connection. With others who understood. With others who healed. With others who believed differently. They learned that faith can evolve. That spirituality can grow. That healing is possible. They learned that God is not shame. Not silence. Not fear. God is love. God is truth. God is freedom. This section is not just about religion. It's about identity. About autonomy. About healing. It's about breaking free. From fear. From control. From shame. It's about reclaiming your voice. Your truth. Your worth. Alyson's story is a mirror. For anyone who felt trapped by faith. Who felt erased by doctrine. Who felt punished for being themselves. It's a reminder that you are not alone. That your questions are valid. That your healing matters. Religion can wound. But it can also heal. If it's rooted in love. In honesty. In grace. Alyson chose healing. They chose truth. They chose liberation. And now, they share it. So others can heal. So others can speak. So others can be free. Section 6. Burnout and Breakdown. The moment Alyson stepped away from the spotlight. Panic attacks, therapy, and the search for safety. The cost of being perfect for too long. Alyson Stoner was always performing. On stage. On screen. In life. They were praised for being professional. For being polite. For being perfect. They showed up early. Worked hard. Smiled constantly. They never complained. never rested, never stopped. But inside, they were crumbling. Quietly, slowly, deeply. The pressure was constant. To succeed, to please, to survive. Every moment was managed. Every emotion was hidden. Every need was ignored. They were exhausted. Not just tired, but drained, empty, numb. Their body was breaking down. Their mind was overwhelmed. Their spirit was fading. They started having panic attacks. Sudden, terrifying, unpredictable. Their heart would race. Their chest would tighten. Their breath would vanish. They felt trapped, frozen, alone. No one saw it. No one knew. No one asked. Because Alyson looked fine. They were still performing, still smiling, still working. But inside, they were screaming, begging for help, begging for rest. They reached a breaking point, a moment of collapse, a moment of truth. They could not keep going. Not like this. Not anymore. So they stepped away. From the spotlight. From the industry. From the performance. They chose to pause. To breathe. To heal. It was not easy. It felt risky. It felt wrong. They had built their life around achievement. Around visibility. Around control. Stepping away felt like failure. Like weakness. Like shame. But it was actually strength. It was courage. It was survival. They started therapy. Real therapy. Deep therapy. They began to unpack the layers. The trauma. The fear. The silence. They talked about childhood. About fame. About identity. They talked about pain. About pressure. About perfection. They cried. They shook. They remembered. They began to feel again, to connect, to trust. They learned about burnout, about nervous system overload, about emotional exhaustion. They learned that burnout is not laziness, not failure, not weakness. It is a signal, a warning, a cry for help. They learned that rest is not optional. It is essential. It is healing. It is powerful. They began to rest. To sleep, to slow down. They began to eat with care, to move with joy, to breathe with intention. They began to say no, to set boundaries, to protect their energy. They began to choose peace, over performance, over perfection, over pressure. This was a new chapter, not glamorous, not public, not easy, but real, honest, transforming. They started to rebuild. From the inside. From the ground up. They asked new questions. What do I need? What do I want? What feels safe? They began to listen. To their body. To their heart. To their truth. They began to trust themselves. Not the industry. Not the audience. Not the expectations. They began to live. Not perform. Not pretend. Not please. This section is about collapse, but also about awakening, about rebirth, about healing. It's about the cost of perfection, the weight of performance, the danger of silence. It's about choosing rest, choosing therapy, choosing truth. Alyson's story is a mirror for anyone who pushed too hard, who stayed too long, who broke quietly. It's a reminder that burnout is real, that breakdowns are valid, that healing is possible. You do not have to earn rest. You do not have to prove pain. You do not have to be perfect. You are allowed to pause, to breathe, to heal. You are allowed to step away, to say no, to choose safety. You are allowed to be human, messy, tender, whole. Alyson chose healing. They chose truth. They chose life. And now, they share it. So others can heal. So others can breathe. So others can begin again. Section 7. Identity in Pieces. Questioning gender, sexuality, and self. The journey from confusion to clarity. How Alyson rebuilt identity from the ground up. Alyson Stoner was known, famous, recognized, admired, but inside, they were unsure, confused, fragmented. They didn't know who they were. Not fully, not clearly, not safely. They had a public image, a brand, a role. But identity is deeper. It's personal. It's private. It's evolving. Alyson began to question. Not just career, not just fame, but self. They asked, who am I? What do I feel? What do I want? They questioned gender. They questioned attraction. They questioned everything. It was scary. It was messy. It was lonely. Because the world had expectations, labels, boxes, rules. But Alyson didn't fit. Not neatly. Not quietly. Not anymore. They felt pressure to conform. To be straight. To be feminine. To be simple. But they weren't. They were complex. Fluid. Real. They felt attraction. But not in the way they were taught. Not in the way they were told. Not in the way they were allowed. They felt different. Not broken. Not wrong. Just different. But difference was punished. Silenced. Shamed. So they hid. They denied. They suppressed. They tried to be normal. To be acceptable. To be safe. But hiding hurts. It disconnects. It isolates. Alyson began to feel the cost. Of silence. Of shame. Of pretending. They felt lost. Split. Unseen. So they began the journey. From confusion to clarity. From fear to truth. From fragments to wholeness. They read. They listened. They reflected. They explored gender. Beyond male. Beyond female. Beyond binary. They explored sexuality. Beyond straight. Beyond labels. Beyond rules. They explored identity. Beyond roles. Beyond fame. Beyond performance. They asked new questions. What feels true? What feels safe? What feels free? They began to name things. Feelings. Experiences. Truths. They began to speak. To share. To connect. They found language. Found community. Found clarity. They discovered they were queer. Not just in attraction, but in spirit. In expression. They discovered they were fluid. In gender. In energy. In being. They discovered they were whole. Even without labels. Even without certainty. Even without approval. This was not easy. It was painful. It was vulnerable. It was brave. They faced judgment, misunderstanding, rejection. But they also found love, support, freedom. They rebuilt identity. Not from outside. Not from fame. Not from fear. But from within. From truth. From choice. From care. They chose authenticity. Over approval. Over safety. Over silence. They chose to be seen. Fully. Honestly. Tenderly. This section is about identity. Not just gender. Not just sexuality. But self. It's about questioning. Exploring. Becoming. It's about breaking free. From roles. From rules. From repression. It's about building from the ground up. With love. With truth. With courage. Alyson's story is a mirror. For anyone who felt confused. Who felt different. Who felt lost. It's a reminder. That identity is yours. That truth is healing. That clarity is possible. You do not have to fit. You do not have to shrink. You do not have to hide. You are allowed to question. To change. To grow. You are allowed to be complex. To be fluid. To be free. Alyson chose truth. They chose self. They chose liberation. And now, they share it. So others can explore. So others can heal. So others can become. Section 8. Healing isn't linear. Therapy, inner work, and emotional recovery. Setbacks, relapses, and breakthroughs. The truth about healing. Messy but worth it. Healing is not a straight line. It's not a checklist. Not a timeline. Not a perfect story. It's messy. It's slow. It's confusing. Alyson Stoner learned this the hard way. They wanted to heal. They were ready. They were committed. They started therapy. They journaled. They meditated. They read books. Listened to podcasts. Tried new tools. They made progress. They felt better. They felt stronger. But then, a setback. A trigger. A spiral. Suddenly, they felt lost again. Anxious. Depressed. Disconnected. They asked, "Why am I back here? Didn't I already heal this? Am I failing?" But they weren't failing. They were learning. They were deepening. They were growing. Healing isn't linear. It loops. It twists. It revisits. Old wounds resurface. New layers appear. Hidden pain comes forward. Each time, you go deeper. You understand more. You release more. Alyson had to accept this. That healing is not a race. Not a performance. Not a destination. It's a relationship. With yourself. With your past. With your body. Some days were light. Peaceful. Hopeful. Other days were heavy. Dark. Overwhelming. They cried. They shook. They froze. They had panic attacks. Flashbacks. Sleepless nights. They doubted everything. Their progress. Their strength. Their worth. But they kept going. Kept showing up. Kept trying. They learned to track patterns. To notice triggers. To name emotions. They learned to breathe. To ground. To self-soothe. They learned to ask for help. To lean on others. To receive support. They learned that healing is relational. It happens in connection. In safety. In trust. They built a support system. Therapists. Friends. Mentors. People who listened. Who validated. Who stayed. They learned to speak. To share. To be vulnerable. They learned that shame fades in the light. That silence breaks in community. That pain softens in love. They had breakthroughs. Moments of clarity. Moments of peace. Moments of joy. They felt their body relax. Their mind quiet. Their heart open. They felt alive. Present. Whole. But even then, healing continued. New layers emerged. New challenges appeared. Because healing is lifelong. Not a one-time fix. Not a final chapter. It's a practice. A process. A path. Alyson embraced this. They stopped chasing perfection. Stopped rushing. Stopped comparing. They started honoring the pace. The rhythm. The truth. They started celebrating small wins. A good night's sleep. A kind thought. A moment of calm. They started forgiving setbacks. A bad day. A relapse. A breakdown. They started trusting themselves. Their body. Their wisdom. Their journey. This section is about truth. The truth of healing. The truth of recovery. The truth of being human. It's not clean. Not easy. Not fast. But it's worth it. Every tear. Every tremble. Every step. Alyson's story is a mirror. For anyone healing. Anyone struggling. Anyone trying. It's a reminder. That you're not broken. Not behind. Not alone. You're healing. In your way. In your time. In your truth. You will have setbacks. You will have relapses. You will have breakthroughs. You will cry. You will laugh. You will grow. You will feel lost. Then found. Then free. Healing isn't linear. But it is real. It is powerful. It is possible. Alyson chose healing. Again and again. Even when it was hard. Even when it was slow. Even when it hurt. And now, they share it, so others can heal, so others can hope, so others can begin. Section 9. Speaking Out. Alyson Stoner was a child star. They knew the spotlight. They knew the pressure. They knew the cost. They lived it. They survived it. They saw what others did not. Behind the scenes, the industry was not safe. It was not kind. It was not built for children. It was built for profit, for speed, for control. Children were treated like products, like tools, like assets. They were praised for talent, but punished for emotion. They were rewarded for obedience, but silenced when they spoke up. Alyson saw this clearly. They felt it deeply. They carried it silently. For years, they stayed quiet. They followed the rules. They played the part. But silence has a cost. It protects the system. It hides the harm. It delays the healing. Alyson reached a point. They could not stay quiet. Not anymore. Not after everything. They chose to speak, to share, to advocate. They began telling the truth. About auditions. About contracts. About exploitation. They talked about long hours. About emotional manipulation. About unsafe environments. They talked about the lack of support. No therapists. No advocates. No protection. They talked about the fear of being replaced, of being punished, of being misunderstood. They talked about the trauma, the breakdowns, the panic attacks, the dissociation. They talked about the system. Not just one person, not just one studio, but the entire structure. Alyson did not speak to destroy. They spoke to rebuild, to reform, to protect. They wanted change, real change, systemic change. They called for new policies, for mental health support, for trauma-informed care, for ethical standards. They called for education, for parents, for agents, for producers. They called for accountability, for the industry to own its harm, to repair its damage, to do better. They used their voice, not just in interviews, not just in essays, but in action. They joined panels. They met with lawmakers. They collaborated with advocates. They created resources for child performers, for families, for survivors. They built community, safe spaces, support networks, healing circles. They did not just speak. They listened. They learned. They led. This was not easy. It came with backlash, with criticism, with risk. But Alyson stayed firm. Because the truth matters. Because children matter. Because healing matters. They knew the cost of silence. They lived it. They carried it. They broke it. Now, they speak for others. For the child who is scared. For the teen who is confused. For the adult who is still healing. They speak for justice. For dignity. For safety. They speak to change the narrative. From fame to wellness. From profit to protection. From silence to truth. This section is about advocacy. About courage. About responsibility. It is about using your voice. Not for attention, but for impact. It is about naming harm, so it can be healed, so it can be stopped, so it can be prevented. Alyson's story is a call to action. For the industry, for society, for all of us. It is a reminder that children deserve safety, deserve care, deserve respect. It is a reminder that silence protects power, but truth protects people. It is a reminder that speaking out is hard, but staying silent is harder. Alyson chose truth. They chose advocacy. They chose change. And now, they share it, so others can speak, so others can heal, so others can be safe. Section 10. Boundaries and Rebuilding. Asterisk. Alyson Stoner spent years saying yes. Yes to auditions. Yes to roles. Yes to expectations. They said yes to pressure. Yes to silence. Yes to being perfect. They said yes to others. But no to themselves. No to rest. No to truth. No to safety. This worked for a while. It kept them employed. It kept them praised. It kept them visible. But it did not keep them well. It did not keep them whole. It did not keep them free. They began to feel the cost, the exhaustion, the confusion, the loss of self. They realized something important. Saying yes to everything is not strength. It is fear. It is survival. It is self-abandonment. So they began to learn a new word, a powerful word, a healing word. No. No to overwork. No to toxic relationships. No to unsafe environments. No to guilt. No to shame. No to pretending. At first, it felt wrong. It felt selfish. It felt scary. But it was not wrong. It was necessary. It was life-saving. They began to set boundaries. Clear ones. Firm ones. Loving ones. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. They are choices. They are protection. Alyson started small. Saying no to extra projects. Saying no to draining conversations. Saying no to people who did not respect them. They said no to old patterns. To people-pleasing. To over-functioning. To emotional labor without support. They said no to being available all the time. No to being responsible for everyone's feelings. No to being the strong one. And with every no, they made space. Space for rest. Space for truth. Space for healing. They began to rebuild. Not just their schedule, but their relationships. Their environment. Their life. They asked new questions. What feels safe? What feels nourishing? What feels aligned? They created safe spaces. Places where they could be real. Where they could cry. Where they could breathe. They chose people who listened. Who respected boundaries. Who offered care. They built relationships based on honesty. Not performance. Not obligation. Not fear. They learned to communicate clearly. To express needs. To ask for support. To say when something felt wrong. They learned that healthy relationships are mutual. Not one-sided. Not draining. Not manipulative. They learned that love includes boundaries. That care includes consent. That connection includes choice. This was not easy. It took time. It took practice. It took courage. They had to unlearn old habits. To stop apologizing for saying no. To stop shrinking to fit others. To stop ignoring red flags. They had to trust themselves. Their instincts. Their limits. Their worth. They had to believe they deserved safety. Deserved respect. Deserved peace. And slowly, they began to feel it. The shift. The relief. The freedom. They reclaimed their time. No more overbooking. No more rushing. No more burnout. They reclaimed their energy. No more emotional drains. No more toxic cycles. No more pretending. They reclaimed their purpose. Not based on fame. Not based on approval. But based on truth. They asked, what matters to me? What do I want to create? What do I want to feel? They began to live with intention. To choose projects that aligned. To choose people who uplifted. To choose routines that restored. They began to feel whole. Not because everything was perfect, but because they were present. They were honest. They were free. This section is about boundaries. About rebuilding. About reclaiming. It is about saying no, so you can say yes to yourself. It is about creating safety, so you can grow. It is about choosing relationships that honor your truth. Alyson's story is a guide for anyone who feels overwhelmed, who feels used, who feels lost. It is a reminder that boundaries are not rejection. They are protection. That rebuilding is not weakness. It is wisdom. That reclaiming your life is not selfish. It is sacred. You are allowed to say no, to rest, to disconnect, to choose peace. You are allowed to rebuild, to start fresh, to create new patterns. You are allowed to reclaim your time, your energy, your purpose. Alyson chose boundaries. They chose healing. They chose truth. And now, they share it. So others can rebuild. So others can rest. So others can live. Section 11. Lessons for all of us. How to break cycles in our own lives. Alyson Stoner's story is personal, but it is also universal. It holds lessons for all of us, for anyone who has struggled, for anyone who wants to heal, for anyone who wants to help. Their journey shows what trauma looks like, not just in crisis, but in silence, in survival, in everyday life. Trauma is not always loud. It can be quiet, hidden, invisible, can live in the body, in habits, in relationships, in beliefs. Alyson's story teaches us to look deeper, to ask questions, to notice patterns, to listen with care. They show that trauma can come from many places, from family, from fame, from religion, from systems. It is not just about one event. It is about what happens next, how it is handled, how it is buried, how it is carried. They teach us that healing is possible, but not easy, not fast, not perfect. Healing takes time. It takes support. It takes truth. It takes courage to face the past, to feel the pain, to speak the truth. It takes strength to rest, to set boundaries, to choose safety. Alyson shows us that healing is not linear. There are setbacks, relapses, breakthroughs. There are tears. There is confusion. There is growth. They teach us that healing is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is power. It is freedom. So what can we learn? What can we do? How can we support survivors? First, we listen. Without judgment. Without fixing. Without rushing. We hold space. We offer safety. We validate pain. We believe them. We respect their pace. We honor their truth. Second, we educate ourselves. About trauma. About recovery. About boundaries. We learn what helps and what harms. We learn what to say and what not to say. We stop asking, "Why did you stay?" We start asking, "What do you need?" We stop blaming. We start supporting. Third, we reflect on our own lives, our own patterns, our own wounds, our own cycles. We ask hard questions. What have I ignored? What have I repeated? What do I need to heal? We look at our relationships. Are they safe? Are they honest? Are they mutual? We look at our habits. Are they nourishing? Are they protective? Are they kind? We look at our beliefs. Do they support healing? Or do they reinforce shame? We begin to break cycles. Cycles of silence. Cycles of control. Cycles of fear. We begin to choose differently. To speak. To rest. To care. Alyson's story is a guide. Not just for survivors, but for all of us. It teaches us to be gentle. With ourselves. With others. With the process. It teaches us to be honest. About pain. About healing. About change. It teaches us to be brave. To face the past. To speak the truth. To choose freedom. This section is about action. About reflection. About transformation. It is about learning from Alyson. Not just what they went through, but how they grew, how they healed, how they now help others. It is about becoming part of the solution. Not just watching. Not just sympathizing. But showing up. We can all do something. We can all support someone. We can all heal something. We can all break a cycle, even if it is small, even if it is quiet, even if it is hard, because every step matters, every choice counts, every voice helps. Alyson chose to speak, to heal, to lead, and now they share it, so others can learn, so others can grow, so others can begin. Section 12. Becoming Whole. Alyson Stoner has lived many lives. Child star, dancer, actor, survivor. They have faced trauma, fame, silence, collapse. They have questioned everything. Their body, their identity, their faith. They have broken down and rebuilt again and again. Today, Alyson is still evolving, still healing, still growing, but they are no longer performing for approval, no longer chasing perfection, no longer hiding. They are living with intention, with truth, with care. They are an artist, creating from the heart, not from pressure, not from fear. They are an advocate, speaking for those who cannot, fighting for change, building safer systems. They are a healer, not just for others, but for themselves. Every day, they use their story, not as a brand, but as a bridge. They use their voice, not for fame, but for freedom. They use their platform to educate, to empower, to connect. They believe in truth, even when it is hard, even when it is messy, even when it hurts. They believe in community, in shared healing, in mutual care, in collective growth. They believe in self-love, not as a trend, but as a practice, as a lifeline. They have learned to care for themselves, to rest, to nourish, to protect. They have learned to forgive themselves for the silence, for the survival, for the struggle. They have learned to celebrate themselves for the courage, for the clarity, for the change. This is what becoming whole looks like. Not perfect, not finished, but real. It is about integration, bringing all parts together. The pain, the joy, the truth. It is about acceptance of the past, of the present, of the self. It is about love, not just for others, but for the person in the mirror. Alyson's story is a message for anyone still hurting, still hiding, still healing. It says, you are not alone. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are allowed to feel, to rest, to speak. You are allowed to change, to grow, to begin again. You are allowed to be whole, even if you are still healing, even if you are still learning, even if you are still afraid. Wholeness is not a destination. It is a direction, a choice, a practice. It is built in moments, in boundaries, in breath, in truth. It is built in connection, with safe people, with kind words, with shared stories. It is built in love, not just romantic love, but self-love, community love, spiritual love. Alyson chose this path, not because it was easy, but because it was real. They chose to heal, to speak, to lead, and now they share it, so others can heal, so others can speak, so others can become whole. This final section is not an ending. It is a beginning, for Alyson, for you, for all of us, because becoming whole is possible, even after trauma, even after silence, even after collapse. It begins with truth. It grows with care. It thrives in love. And it belongs to you.